Hi folks, hope you're doing amazing. Today we're going to be talking about something that has been playing out on the internet for the last few days and weeks. All of this started as a result of an event I took part in a couple of weeks ago in Ohio, America First United. The goal of the event was to platform candidates running on America First policies. We're also very critical of foreign influence in our government, specifically the influence of the Israeli government and Israeli government-linked actors on American politics and culture. And ever since then, things have kind of blown up. I shared my own experience and thoughts on the situation a few days ago in a video detailing what happened. Needless to say, this whole situation has evolved into something much bigger. It has turned into allegations of certain people being feds, certain people trying to co-opt the America First movement, grift off the America First movement, split it entirely, or steer it in a completely different ideological direction. And ultimately, a lot of this discourse is centered around two figures: Nick Fuentes, who did not attend the America First United event, and Dan Bilzerian, who attended via FaceTime and, funny enough, spoke directly after my speech at AFU. Now, needless to say, this rift has played out publicly on the internet and has sparked a massive conversation around what the America First movement actually represents, who the real leader of the movement is, and what direction the movement should ultimately take moving forward. And honestly, I think this conflict has also exposed something much deeper than just internet drama. It has exposed a real identity crisis within the broader America First ecosystem and the online dissident right as a whole, especially in this post-2024 political environment. Because when people say America First, they're not always talking about the same thing anymore. You have factions within the movement that are primarily focused on anti-interventionism and foreign policy. You have others focused on immigration and nationalism. You also have people focused specifically on Israeli influence in American politics. You have populists, dissidents, religious conservatives, online activists, and then others who are increasingly moving into explicitly racial or ethnic politics like Dan Bilzerian. So what we're witnessing right now is not just a feud between personalities, it's a battle over the identity of the movement. Now, before we get into any of these specifics around the situation, as I said in my original video that I published a few days ago discussing the America First United conference, I do have to say this: America First is Nick Fuentes. I don't think anybody can really disagree with that statement at this point. Historically, the phrase America First predates Nick by nearly a century. Presidents used it in the early 20th century. Pat Buchanan brought it back into the modern political lexicon. Trump famously made it one of the things he ran on in 2015, but in the modern online political space, especially within dissident right-wing circles, the phrase is now heavily identified, if not completely owned, by Nick Fuentes and his Groyper movement. It's the name of his show, it's the merch he sells, it's the slogan his audience rallies around. It is deeply tied to his identity and brand. When people hear America First online today, they think of Nick Fuentes. Even the California Republican Party, when it published its memo condemning America First a few months ago, it specifically cited Nick Fuentes directly. And because of that, newer figures entering the space are often viewed with immediate suspicion if they appear to be building parallel leadership structures, alternative brands, or competing influence ecosystems around the same audience. I think that context is extremely important to understand because it reveals why this situation escalated as aggressively and as quickly as it did. Now, on the other side of Nick Fuentes, at this moment, you have Dan Bilzerian, whose public image for many years largely revolved around him being a degenerate gambler, an influencer, celebrity of sorts. That was most of his public identity until COVID, when he appeared to undergo some sort of personal transformation. He wrote a book, stepped away from his degenerate lifestyle, I guess got married, from what I understand, and generally distanced himself from the hyper-hedonistic lifestyle he had built his brand around. Then, about 2 years ago, he entered the Israel-critical and anti-establishment political space. Now, all of that escalated very quickly, as we will see here, with Dan eventually claiming that Nick is a Fed, accusing Nick of constantly showing division, of flip-flopping, attacking allies, and hurting the broader America First movement instead of helping unite it. Nick then responded with some very serious allegations that we're going to look at in a moment. Lucas Gage also jumped in, reaffirming those allegations and adding other allegations on top of those. Needless to say, all of this has turned into an absolute clusterfuck, and it caused people to choose sides. Who do they align with? What reasons do they have behind that alignment? Who is the face of the America First movement? And is Dan Bilzerian the face of the America First movement, especially when you consider that he's out here saying this kind of stuff.
I mean, honestly, the only real battle in the world today that I see worth fighting is fucking, exterminating Israel. I mean, I would sign up tomorrow and go fucking put boots on the ground and go fucking kill Israelis. That would be a great day for me. I would fucking sign up on the fucking draft waiver wherever. Give me a rifle and send me the fuck over there. I truly believe that the majority of that country is evil and they're perpetuating a genocide. They've been operating apartheid. They're suppressing those Palestinians. They're attacking their neighbors. They're operating like terrorists. They're fucking arrogant, ungrateful bastards, and they need to be wiped off the fucking map. So,
Dan Bilzerian, thanks. It's always a pleasure having you on. And yeah, man, you don't self-censor for sure. I mean that's what being American's all about, right? Is standing up against tyranny and fighting for what you believe to be right.
Indeed. I hope I don't get you kicked off kick, but it was good chatting with you, brother.
Now, this clip resurfaced around the same time several conservative influencers started pushing the idea that Dan Bilzerian was becoming the new leader, or at least the new face of the America First movement. And as that narrative started spreading online, Nick Fuentes tweeted out, "The first time I met Dan Bilzerian at his house, he had us put our phones in another room, then asked me how difficult it would be to assassinate Israeli government ministers. Then he invited me to Dubai and Qatar, which I declined. On his way there, he was ambushed by the FBI." Lucas Gage jumped in and responded to Nick saying, "Holy fuck, Nick, I swear to God, he did the same thing to me. He walked me and Jake up to that room with a batting cage. We put our phones on the couch and went up to that secluded room with a big TV. He asked me about where Ben Shapiro lived and how he could be taken out." Now, obviously, these are extraordinarily incendiary allegations. We're talking about accusations that somebody who is currently running for Congress in Florida was allegedly asking questions involving assassinations of Israeli officials and public figures. Then you combine that with reports that he was later approached and investigated by the FBI under circumstances that are still publicly unclear, and you can understand why this whole thing just exploded online the way that it did. To be absolutely clear, these are the kinds of allegations that can completely destroy somebody's reputation, especially somebody attempting to enter political circles, gain institutional legitimacy, and build influence in American politics. Needless to say, these claims have been heavily disputed from both sides. Dan Bilzerian has denied that these conversations happened the way they were described. Other people have posted videos from what appeared to be gatherings at Dan's house showing Nick Fuentes, Myron Gaines, and others present, arguing that phones were not at all confiscated or put away in the dramatic way later described online by Nick and Lucas Gage. But regardless of where the truth ultimately lands in this situation, the allegations themselves are absolutely nuclear. And when you combine them with clips like the one circulating from the live stream with Sneeko, where Dan is openly talking about wanting to do what he's saying he wants to do to Israelis and speaking with this extremely militant rhetoric, it creates an environment that does not help move political discourse in a productive direction. And this is honestly where I think the broader cultural critique truly comes into play. Because look, you can absolutely criticize the state of Israel. You can criticize Netanyahu. You can criticize the IDF. I've done all of that. I've criticized Netanyahu, the Israeli government. I've called the IDF a genocidal force in the context of Gaza and what they've done in Lebanon. But there is a very big difference between criticizing a government, criticizing foreign policy, criticizing influence, criticizing interventionism, versus openly talking about wanting to grab a rifle and just go kill people of a specific national origin. And I just don't think most Americans, including many Americans who are deeply skeptical of Israel or American foreign policy, are going to get behind rhetoric that sounds openly homicidal or revolutionary for the sake of shock value. Unless there is clear constitutional justification for war, unless there is actual evidence of direct threat or aggression that would justify military action on the ground in Israel, it just comes across as intentionally inflammatory rhetoric designed to generate outrage, attention, clips, and most importantly, virality. And look, this is part of the bigger issue with the internal political economy we currently live in. We live in the attention economy. The most outrageous statement gets you the most engagement. The most inflammatory clip gets you the most views. The most controversial rhetoric gets algorithmically rewarded. And over time, that creates a political culture where people increasingly escalate their rhetoric, not necessarily because it's strategically effective to their political cause, but because it helps them maintain online relevance. And honestly, one of the biggest questions I have in this entire situation is whether Dan Bilzerian is even running for Congress seriously in the first place, or whether this is ultimately just another giant publicity operation centered around internet attention. Because when I look at most of the clips surrounding his congressional campaign, what I see is him sitting in a room in a white t-shirt doing live streams and podcasts saying provocative things. I don't see campaign infrastructure. I don't see a serious ground game. I don't see large-scale voter outreach. I don't see him traveling around his district consistently doing campaign events. I don't see the kind of serious political operation you normally associate with somebody genuinely trying to win a congressional seat. And look, he obviously doesn't have the backing of the local establishment GOP in Florida, which is overwhelmingly going to support incumbent Randy Fine because that's just how the GOP operates. So the obvious question becomes, what exactly is his strategy here? Because Florida's 6th district includes large Jewish populations, large boomer populations, which are heavily Christian Zionist or just Zionist in nature. This is the voter base out there, especially in parts of southern Florida. So when you openly use rhetoric that sounds revolutionary, militant, or openly hostile toward Israelis and Jews broadly, you have to start asking yourself politically, how exactly does this help him win the district? Is the goal actually to win office? Is it to build influence? Is it to gain clout online? Is it ideological activism? Is it a grift? Is it a publicity campaign? Is it a media operation disguised as a campaign? Those are legitimate questions people are now asking. And as somebody who is personally running for office myself, who is out every day in my district campaigning, spending my own money, putting in the hours, flyering neighborhoods, meeting voters, building infrastructure, and trying to seriously win this race while my own party undercuts everything I do, I take campaigning very seriously. All that being said, this is still America. People absolutely have the freedom to say whatever they want. Dan Bilzerian can say whatever he wants, but freedom of speech does not mean freedom from social consequences, political consequences, or even public scrutiny. And that public scrutiny is very deserved in this case, considering everything that he's built around himself and how he's choosing to challenge somebody within their own community. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Fed allegations started getting thrown around left and right. Dan Bilzerian initially claimed that Nick was a Fed, accusing him of causing constant division and endless infighting within the movement. He claimed Nick defended Epstein, then said he had attacked a Christian man, only to later endorse a Jewish Democrat woman after previously claiming the left wants us dead. This latter accusation made specifically in reference to the Ohio gubernatorial race involving Casey Putsch. That said, the Casey Putsch race specifically became a major point of tension after the America First United event in Ohio. A lot of people involved with AFU, including Dan Bilzerian and others around the organization, believed that Nick Fuentes should have backed Casey more aggressively and that Nick potentially could have helped Casey win. Now, whether Nick could actually have helped Casey win is obviously speculative at this point. Nobody really knows. But what's undeniable is that many people inside that space view Nick's treatment of Casey Putsch, especially after the election when Nick tweeted "rest in piss" about Casey's campaign, as unbecoming of somebody who positions himself as a leader of the America First movement. Now, to be fair, you can criticize Nick for that if you want. At the same time, Nick can say whatever the hell he wants. This is America, as I said earlier. He doesn't have to endorse anybody either. His endorsement is his to give or withhold if he chooses, and nobody's entitled to it just because they're running on an America First platform. But all that said, ultimately, this entire clusterfuck of reactions and really the broader Fed accusations from both sides is what started causing all of this to spiral publicly. What followed were the allegations that we saw Nick made against Dan, combined with claims about Dan later being stopped by the FBI. Then you also had Laura Loomer recently claiming that Dan Bilzerian was an FBI informant. And regardless of what the truth actually is here, this is the discourse currently consuming large parts of the online dissident America First space. Constant accusations of this guy's a Fed, no, that guy's a Fed, they're controlled opposition, they're compromised, or they are intentionally trying to sabotage the movement from within. And the reality is, a lot of this is just inconclusive. A lot of this is speculative. Who is a Fed in this situation? I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm not going to pretend to have any evidence that points any which way. That said, are there shady clips out there? Yes, they are. Could they lead somebody to believe that a specific individual or a group of individuals are feds? Sure. But to be fair, anybody could be framed in that manner. Now, what should also be noted is that Bilzerian's rhetoric has continued escalating regardless of the controversy surrounding him. He continues to publicly repeat the same kind of rhetoric that initially caused concern to many people in the first place, and which is causing concern now, including some of the comments that he made just today on Alex Jones's show.
If you were the president, what would you do?
I would declare war on Israel. I would cut off, I mean, at a minimum, I would cut off all foreign aid. I would let Iran have free will to do what they want with Israel. I would kind of let the problem probably take care of itself, to be honest, because if we stop defending Israel, I think they would get what they deserve. They have been persecuting these Palestinians. They've been operating apartheid. They've attacked all their neighbors. I mean, they bombed 7 countries in a year. They continue to just have unprovoked aggression. I mean, they are a total terrorist nation. I just don't understand how they're not qualified as a terrorist nation. They have nukes. They acquired them illegally. They refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they said that they would just kill everybody if they feel threatened. So, please tell me, Alex, how does that not make them the greatest terrorist threat to the world today?
I mean, look, the diagnosis is accurate. It's on the nose. He's not just making this up out of thin air. The United Nations, multiple human rights organizations, and even former officials and analysts have raised many of the exact same concerns and documented allegations surrounding what has happened not just in Gaza, but also in southern Lebanon. So when Dan Bilzerian talks about civilian casualties, destruction, displacement, collective punishment, or disproportionate military force to a genocidal degree, these are criticisms that already exist in mainstream international discourse. These aren't fringe observations. Now, the prescription that follows, declaring war on Israel, isn't something that I think most Americans would support. I think that's an extremely escalatory position, and honestly, it's probably politically and strategically unrealistic as well, at least at this moment. But toward the end of the clip, he pivots into something that I think a lot more Americans across the political spectrum would actually agree with, which is simply ending American foreign aid and military aid to Israel altogether and forcing Israel to handle its own regional conflicts independently. And honestly, I think that is a much more reasonable position than openly talking about waging war. If Israel wants to continue engaging in these regional conflicts, then fine, let them do it with their own resources, their own economy, and their own military infrastructure. But at the same time, we also have to apply the same standards to Israel that we apply to every other nation on earth. Because let's be honest here for a second, folks. America has historically imposed sanctions, trade embargoes, diplomatic isolation, and massive international pressure campaigns on countries accused of many of the same things Israel is currently being accused of by many countries around the world. Whether you agree with those accusations or not is a separate conversation. The point is consistency. If the United States government claims to operate under some kind of moral framework internationally, then that same framework has to apply equally to allies and enemies alike. Because look, part of the frustration that many Americans have, not just on the dissident right, but also on parts of the anti-war left and even among independents, is that perception that Israel is treated as uniquely untouchable within American foreign policy circles. And when people see billions of dollars continue to flow overseas while Americans struggle economically at home, natural resentment starts building at home. Now, another point Dan raises, and this is something I discussed a few videos ago, is the issue of Israel's nuclear program. Israel is one of the only countries in the world where the United States effectively operates under a don't ask, don't tell type policy regarding Israel's nuclear capabilities. We all know they have them. Everybody knows they have them. But officially, there's this strategic ambiguity where nobody publicly confirms the extent of the arsenal, the doctrine, or the operational structure behind it. And the justification historically has been that ambiguity creates deterrence. It creates uncertainty for our adversaries in the region. It's basically geopolitical poker. But personally, I don't think that kind of strategic ambiguity should exist for any nation, because over time, it can create an environment where a state begins operating with the assumption that there are effectively no real limits or consequences for their actions because they're backed by the most powerful military in the world. Now, all that being said, bringing it back to the broader conversation we were having about the identity crisis currently unfolding inside the dissident right and the America First space. Because underneath all this drama between Nick and Dan, underneath the Fed accusations being thrown around, the influencer drama warfare, the live streams, the internet chaos, there's a much bigger question being asked. What exactly is this movement going to become? And this goes back to conversations I personally had at the America First United event in Ohio. I was talking to several different people involved with the conference in different capacities, some of whom have since publicly aligned strongly with Dan Bilzerian. And I remember multiple people telling me directly at that time that Dan Bilzerian was becoming the new leader of the America First movement and that he should be the face of the movement, that he's the man that we can follow into war. Now, my immediate reaction was, what are you talking about? If I'm following anybody into war, I'm following General Patton. Now, obviously, Patton is dead, but the point is made. Because here's my view on all of this. We just had a conference filled with people running for office, building campaigns, taking reputational risks, putting their livelihoods on the line, and actually attempting to create political change in the real world. To me, all of those people are leaders in different capacities. At the end of the day, though, movements do eventually end up having symbolic faces attached to them, especially online. Now, right now, whether people like it or not, the online face of the America First movement is still Nick Fuentes. I think that's just objectively true. That doesn't mean Dan Bilzerian can't be a major voice within the movement or within that ecosystem. He clearly already is. But who becomes the actual face of this political movement? But as to the question of who will be the actual face of this political movement within government, honestly, I don't think anybody knows yet, and you can't point to a single individual, because this ultimately comes down to who actually gets elected into office based on these policies. That's how political movements historically crystallize. Just look at AOC. She became the face of modern Democrat socialism in America the moment she entered Congress. The same thing will happen with America First politics. The moment somebody carrying these ideas gains real institutional power, be it in Congress, in the Senate, through governorship, executive office, then suddenly you no longer just have an internet movement, you have an actual political faction building within our government infrastructure. And until then, a lot of what we're witnessing unfold is still relegated solely to online influence, to clout, to personalities, to live streams, and completing influencer ecosystems trying to anoint leaders before the movement has actually embedded itself institutionally within its final boss of influence. Now, all that being said, don't get me wrong, online influence matters tremendously. Narrative warfares matter. That's how you win minds. Meme culture matters. That's how you spread the message. Influencers matter. All of that is how you shape public consciousness and help propel candidates into office. But until you have publicly elected figures openly pushing these ideas from the floor of Congress, the Senate, governorships, or executive institutions, you don't fully have a political movement with institutional power. You have an ideological ecosystem that is still in the process of trying to transform itself into one. Now, obviously, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. You guys let me know in the comments down below what you think. Hope all of you have a terrific day. Peace.